Hello and welcome to a new series that I'm doing where I'm basically summing up some of the episodes that I've done on my podcast, which is called The Heart of the Piano. So a lot of you may not be aware, but on the YouTube channel until now, I've used the YouTube channel to do all of the nitty-gritty technical stuff, how to interpret pieces, all the traditional teaching stuff. And then the podcast has been about the psychology of how we become really good musicians, how we learn naturally. I like to think that I've got some pretty cutting edge techniques, particularly geared towards adult learners. And a lot of people come to me specifically for tips on performance anxiety and how we as adults can learn like really gifted, very young prodigies, that kind of mindset. So basically, there are quite a few episodes on Heart of the Piano podcast where I talk about this kind of stuff. On the podcast, I very often have a co-host, someone that I can talk things through with. So I have a guest for you. I have a very special guest, an always available co-host. So here is my guest.
Meow there, music lovers and curious cats. I'm Mimi, your fabulously feline friend who just feasted upon Bob's fascinating podcast, The Heart of the Piano. I listened to the first episode in the series of psychological skills needed to add that special meow-sickle touch to your piano playing, and let me tell you, it's a real treat. So, if you're ready to unlock your musical potential and explore the hidden depths of your creative soul, let's explore the enchanting world of musicality with a flick of our tails and a twinkle in our eyes.
So thank you very much, Mimi. So Mimi is completely, totally AI generated, artificial intelligence. I've been really enjoying playing around with artificial intelligence recently. If you watch until the end of this video, I'll explain a little bit more about how I created Mimi. So basically what Mimi's done is she's summed up one particular podcast episode. I asked the AI to sum up one episode, which is the first in a series of important psychological key skills to be really, really musical. These are my own suggestions, my own kind of system, if you like. This is the most important point. This is what I am always nagging all my students is the most important thing to focus on. I'm not going to tell you what it is straight away, but this is one particular podcast episode, and I will put the link in the description below so that you can actually go listen to that episode if you want. Now, also in that podcast episode, I actually do demonstrate all these things at the piano so you can listen to how these things apply. Whereas at the moment, this YouTube video is just me asking the AI to try to sum it up in as brief a way as possible, but with a lot of humor as well. So hopefully this is going to be entertaining for everyone. And I really did like Mimi's sense of humor. When I was generating, I really was actually quite amused. So yeah, thank you, Mimi. And I like Mimi. I wasn't intending this at all, but I kind of, when I've been watching her back, I think it's a little bit like a female Garfield crossed with Aubrey Plaza, I think. But anyway, I recommend listening to the podcast episodes because I think it's not enough to be deeply musical just by getting all the technique and listening to nitty-gritty stuff about interpretation like I do on this YouTube channel. Anyway, so let's turn things over to Mimi, and Mimi can sum up that episode, and every now and then I'll just kind of respond and give a few little sort of thoughts on what she said. Okay, over to you, Mimi.
Welcome to the first episode of The Art of Musicality. Our friend Bob here has discovered that the real key to musical mastery isn't just hitting the right notes, it's all in the mind. Now, I know what you're thinking. What's Bob on about? Piano lessons with a side of meditation? But trust me, the things Bob teaches his piano students are so zen that they often think he's one step away from handing out incense and yoga mats. Picture this. Bob's sitting there with a student who's struggling to get through Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And he leans in and says, "You know what the secret is? It's all about paying attention and focusing in the right kind of way." And the look on the student's face is priceless. It's like they just got told to start levitating off the piano bench while chanting,
So yeah, I couldn't get Mimi to say kind of particularly well. So yeah, I'm not sure she's like fully summed it up all that well, because when I teach, I do bring up Zen and meditation and Buddhism from time to time. I don't think immediately everyone thinks it's like levitating, but I do start to get a little bit, into spirituality and Buddhism, but I think gently and progressively. So yeah, anyway, let's listen to some more. Okay, back to you, Mimi.
But seriously, Bob's found that teaching these psychological techniques not only helps his students become better musicians, but it also gives them a new perspective on life. And as the students embark on this journey of self-discovery, Bob's there, guiding them like a musical Mr. Miyagi, minus the wax-on, wax-off part, of course.
So this probably isn't too far from the truth. I'm sure, I can't actually think of any examples, but I'm sure there probably are some equivalents of wax on, wax off. I'm sure that I've discussed everyday activities that we can do that can actually help our piano playing. One thing that I do actually is I get students to close their full board, the piano lid thing, like this thing, and actually do tapping on it and exercise how we tap with our fingers. I guess one wax on, wax off thing that might be more relevant is sometimes I discuss how we use the computer mouse when we're at the keyboard, because I do think that how we do everyday things like use a computer mouse can have really strong influences on how we play the piano. Anyway, back to you, Mimi.
Now, Bob admits students often resist these psychological techniques at first. It's like trying to convince a cat to take a bath. They'll claw, hiss, and do anything to avoid it. But once they take the plunge, they'll realize that it's not as bad as they thought. Well, maybe not for the cat, but definitely for the students.
Yes, resistance is something that comes up a lot. I did talk about this in the most recent podcast episode that I did with Cheryl. Again, there'll be a link below. This is the podcast episode on tension and release. And in that episode, I talk a lot about the resistance that my students have and how I've kind of learned to deal with it. I think over the years, I'm gradually learning to be a little bit more gentle in how I introduce these techniques to my students, because sometimes, there is a lot of resistance. But in a way, this is why I make these podcast episodes, and now why I'm making these YouTube tutorials, because and why I also want to write a book about this. The book, I've been wanting to write a book for a long time, and really it's because when students have resistance, I want to be able to give them stuff and go, rather than have to explain it all in the lesson and have the student getting impatient that I'm kind of wasting their time, I want to present everything in a way that's deeply, deeply persuasive, that this stuff works. This is really, really important. This is how you learn more quickly, more efficiently, more musically, how you get peak performance, how you don't get nerves, all this kind of stuff. And it works. When my students do it, even the ones who have resistance, when they do it and get around to doing it, it's huge. It's like night and day. Anyway, so back to you, Mimi.
And then there are those students who get all pumped up and excited after being shown these psychological techniques, like they've just discovered the holy grail of piano playing. And what do? They go home, and sure, they practice, but it's like they've suddenly developed selective amnesia when it comes to the psychological techniques. And when they finally embrace those techniques, it's like watching a caterpillar transform into a butterfly, a musical butterfly. Suddenly, their playing isn't just a series of notes on a page. It becomes a living, breathing masterpiece, all because they learned to mix that hard work and dedication with a healthy dose of psychological finesse.
So, this has come up on the podcast a lot. And there are specifically some podcast episodes that I did with Andy and some podcast episodes that I did with Cheryl. Again, I'll put links in the description below. And basically, especially Cheryl laughs about this. It's like in one episode, I'm like, so how have you got on with all of those psychological techniques? And Cheryl's like, I haven't done them. I'm like, why not? And she's like, well, I forgot. So even when students don't have this resistance and they go, oh my God, these techniques are amazing, and they see what they can do in the lesson, they get home and they just completely forget to do them all. So we'll address this in future episodes. Anyway, okay, so over to you again, Mimi.
Bob always tells his students, the most important thing is to look for what there is to love in every moment of playing. And you can just imagine their faces thinking, really? I'm just trying to play Mary Had a Little Lamb here, not write a love letter. But as they start paying attention, they begin to realize that even the simplest pieces could be brought to life with a little love. Now, I know what you're thinking. Love in music? Aren't we supposed to be focusing on playing the correct notes in the correct way? Well, let me tell you a story. Imagine you're at a party and you come across two people talking. One is reciting facts like an encyclopedia, while the other is sharing a heartfelt story. Who do you think will captivate your attention? The storyteller, of course. Music is no different. Playing without looking for what there is to love results in unmusical playing that sounds as flat as a week-old open can of Coke.
So true. So true. Particularly, almost all my students really, really, truly believe that in pretty much every moment of what they're doing, the priority is playing the correct notes in the correct way. This is so wrong. This is one of the most terrible beliefs that all my students get drawn into. Well, not all of them, but almost all of them. So this is something that we're going to talk about a lot. And I think it takes a lot of persuading a lot of the time. And you know, I talk about this a lot in the podcast episodes with Cheryl as well. So do listen to those podcast episodes. But sometimes in lessons, people really are like, well, isn't it obvious that the primary goal is just to play correctly? No, it isn't. And I'm going to spend a lot of time explaining and persuading why this isn't the case. Even in high level, the highest level possible classical music at peak performance, if that is your priority, you're not going to play well. But anyway, back to you, Mimi.
We don't want to be the typical student who's so focused on playing the correct notes in the correct way that their music feels as robotic as a GPS voice. Turn left at the next bar line. People become so obsessed with getting every note perfect that they forget the whole point of playing music, to feel it, to love it. They're like robots programmed to hit the right keys, but without an ounce of passion. If playing the piano were a romantic relationship, they'd be sending love letters full of bullet points and pie charts. Finding love in a piece is not like solving a complicated maths problem or memorizing the periodic table. It's something you feel deep in your bones. So even when you're playing a beginner piece that seems about as exciting as watching paint dry, you can still find something to love about it. That love will bring out the character, flow, and nuances, turning that dry piece into a flavorful musical experience.
Yes, and this is not just for pieces that are dry. When you apply this to any piece of music, you're going to notice differences. And to me, you know, love, feeling love is what musicality is. And what is musicality? What is the definition? Well, how do you know when something is musical? It's that element of love. It's just that simple and straightforward, the way that I perceive it. Thank you, Mimi. Back to you.
Bob introduced this thing called self-determination theory, or SDT, which breaks down the 3 core psychological needs that we all have, no matter where we're from. SDT is like the psychological equivalent of a metal detector at the beach. It helps us identify the psychological needs hidden beneath the sands of our lives. But just like a metal detector, SDT doesn't tell us what to do with these buried treasures once we've discovered them. It's up to us to figure out how to polish those gems and turn them into something valuable, like a solid sense of self-worth or a fulfilling relationship with music. And we better do it before the tide of life comes in and washes them away.
So, yeah, I'm not completely sure about the analogy there. Like I said, everything is pretty much 100% AI generated. Not completely on board with that analogy, but this self-determination theory is so useful. And I actually did a podcast episode with Cheryl specifically on self-determination theory, with Cheryl at the piano, where I was demonstrating, well, it was like it took the format of like a masterclass. And the change in her playing was amazing when I was guiding her through some of this stuff. So you may want to go listen to that episode. I really, really recommend it. So, okay, back to you, Mimi.
Now, we all have the deep psychological need to feel competent, right? It's like an itch you just can't scratch. But when it comes to playing the piano, that need can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, you want to be good at it. On the other hand, focusing too much on being perfect can make you lose touch with the real heart of the music. When we're not sure if we're good enough, this need can spiral out of control into extreme perfectionism. I'm talking about the kind of perfectionism that keeps you up at night, replaying that one wrong note you played 3 weeks ago. Focusing too much on competency is like trying to impress your date by reciting the periodic table. I mean, sure, it's impressive, but where's the love, man?
So some of that might sound kind of obvious, like common sense. But actually, if you're interested and you go listen to the episode on self-determination theory, there's a lot to unpack with that. There's a lot of layers and a lot of very practical, tangible things that you can do with this knowledge, that when we are driven by the need for competency with a layer underneath of, are we worthy? Are we good enough? That this creates so many problems. There's so many useful, practical, tangible things, but we will come to this in future episodes. But just wanted to point out, it's not just common sense stuff. There's a lot of deeper, useful stuff there. Okay, over to you, Mimi.
Bob says we get a constant inner dialogue when this perfectionist craving to feel competent takes over. It's like having a little nagging voice in your head that won't shut up, and it's about as helpful as a backseat driver on a road trip. You missed that note! That's not the right tempo! Why do you even bother trying? It's like having Simon Cowell inside your head, and trust me, nobody needs that kind of pressure.
So again, this might seem really common sense, but when we go deeper into these topics, there's so many layers and so many nuances and practical, tangible tools that we can do with all of this stuff. But yeah, and I'm sure that this is something that a lot of my students can identify with, the Simon Cowell voice in your head. Anyway, okay, over to you again, Mimi.
Then there's the need to feel connected. When we're driven by this need in our music making, it's like we're in a relationship with the music. We feel empathy, emotions, and in short, musicality. It's like music becomes our soulmate, and we can't help but fall head over heels in love. But here's the catch. Bob argues that it's not possible to feel a deep urge for competency at the same time as an urge for connection. So when we're being driven by this deep urge for competency, we have less access to empathy and connection in that moment. It's like trying to solve a complex crossword puzzle while riding a skateboard downhill.
So not the best analogy, I think, there. And also, I think that some people at first don't really agree with this about whether we can feel this deep urge for competency as well as the deep need for connection. And I think, this is not something that I've read in the literature. This is just my own observation. And I would explain it like this. I think that when there is a deep urge to feel competent, it's something that I feel in my body. I feel in my chest. It's like I need to be good at this. It's like I feel it in between my shoulder blades. It's a deep physical feeling. It's a hunger. And I know what that feels like when I'm performing, when I'm playing, when I'm practicing. I've got to get it right. I've got to be good. There's a lot of ego attached to it. And I know it's a much more subtle feeling, but it's a different feeling in my body when I want to connect, when I'm interested in people, when I'm feeling at ease and I'm feeling empathy. And what I would argue is that when we have this deep physical feeling that is the signal that we're craving to be good enough, we're hungry in a greedy way to be, I'm good enough, I can do this. I challenge you to imagine that feeling at the same time as genuinely being interested in and empathic with the people around you. I would argue that you just can't have those two things at the same time. And I talk about this more in podcast episodes. The link will be below in the description. So, okay, back to you, Mimi.
So making music is like a tug of war between the need to be competent and the need to feel connected. But what if we could let go of that need to feel competent, like a balloon floating into the sky? What if we could approach music with a beginner's mind, open and curious, like a child discovering a new toy? Can we let go of concern about others judging us? According to Bob, looking for what there is to love is the antidote to the worry about being judged. It's like when we feel a strong, happy bond with loved ones, we're not worried about being judged. But if that worry creeps in, it's like suddenly becoming self-conscious about the way you laugh during a hilarious comedy show. The laughter, which was once so natural and carefree, becomes stifled and awkward, and the shared joy in the room takes a hit.
So, as we'll discuss later in this YouTube video, but also just generally across all the podcast episodes and future YouTube videos, it is possible to practice the skill of loving stuff. But we're going to come to that, because it's a lot of this again might sound common sense, but it's not enough just to go, well, don't worry about being judged. That's really difficult. That just brings out more worry. So it's going to be really useful, just basically looking at some of the useful, tangible skills of how we make this happen. Back to you, Mimi.
By not caring about feeling competent, we can actually feel the tension and release, moments of suspense and charm in a piece more deeply. It's like being swept away in the whirlwind of emotions during a captivating movie, where you lose yourself in the story and forget you're just sitting in a dark room with a bunch of strangers.
Tension and release, really, really important in music. Do listen to my latest podcast episode on tension and release. I'm sure we'll be covering it in future YouTube videos as well. By the way, do subscribe so that you're notified when there are going to be all these future YouTube videos where we talk more about all these psychological skills.
Now, have you ever wondered why you prefer some musicians over others? Is it their technique, their stage presence, their dashing good looks? While all those factors may play a part, playing with love is that secret sauce that sets those musicians apart, even the talented beginners. A great pianist can make any piece sound amazing, even the ones that Bob thinks are like the oral equivalent of watching snails racing in slow motion. Yep, he's talking about Einaudi and Sadie's Gymnopédie. When played with love, these pieces are suddenly transformed into thrilling, edge-of-your-seat adventures that leave everyone completely captivated. The power of love breathes life into their performance, turning the ordinary into extraordinary, and the mundane into mesmerizing.
Yes, all my friends know just how much I love Einaudi. There's a really good YouTube channel called Tantacrul. This guy quite hilariously talks about why Einaudi isn't very good. I'm going to leave a link to that video in the description below. I don't think the video is exactly about that. The video is actually about something else, but he keeps dropping in that. Now, basically, I don't want everyone to think, oh, I'm not allowed to like Einaudi, or even that I wouldn't be able to teach Einaudi. I teach Einaudi. I teach pieces I don't enjoy to my students because I practice looking for what there is to love. Even in pieces that I kind of go, oh my God, when I'm teaching them, when I perform them, when I have anything to do with them, I am always looking for what there is to love. So I practice what I preach here. Anyway, back to you, Mimi.
Now, Bob knows that Western culture sometimes sees love as soft or fluffy, but love is actually at the core of his psychological approaches to being musical and achieving peak performance. We live in a world where the mere mention of love makes people think of Hallmark cards and cheesy rom-coms. But if we could all just embrace the love, there'd be fewer reenactments of the movie Whiplash in music schools.
So for anyone who's not seen the film Whiplash, this is really like the most extreme form of perfectionism in music. To cut a long story short, there's this student jazz drummer. He wants to become amazing, and there's this teacher who is just the most ridiculous, over-the-top drill sergeant type teacher. Anyway, that's what it's referring to. And also in future YouTube episodes and podcast episodes, I probably will talk about how recent psychological advances and scientific advances are kind of transforming how we see the topic of love, the emotion of love. This is really an exciting area of recent research. Anyway, back to you, Mimi.
You see, some people might not believe that looking for what there is to love is really a skill that you can practice. It sounds like something a hippie would say, right? Oh man, just look for the love, man, and everything will be groovy. But it's true. Bob explained that, for example, Buddhism has this fantastic way of systemizing and practicing skills related to love, which otherwise might seem too abstract or intangible for most Westerners. Bob isn't suggesting you shave your head and wear an orange robe, although that could be a fashion statement in itself.
So, yeah, as my students know, I do bring up Buddhism from time to time in lessons. I'm very interested in Buddhism. I've been meditating for a long time and have taken quite a lot of classes in Buddhism. I also think it's really important to point out, I have to point this out to all my friends and all my students, that sometimes I have to say things like, the Buddha said blah, blah, blah in his teachings. The Buddha said this, but I don't want to come across like I'm in a cult or like I'm like the world's strongest Buddhist. Sometimes when I say this, I have to kind of say, it's almost like I need terms and conditions afterwards, because I'm not sure that I personally believe that there existed in reality this Buddha who was 100% completely enlightened. I'm not sure I completely believe this. I think that the Buddha in many ways is what's the word I'm looking for? It's not a stereotype. It's an archetype, a figure of the ideal kind of thing that we can be. I'm not sure that historically there was this fully enlightened being. So I have to say, every time I say the Buddha said this in his teachings, I have to then go, terms and conditions may apply. I don't think the Buddha really existed. So just bear that in mind whenever I talk about Buddhism and the Buddha. Anyway, back to you, Mimi.
Bob mentioned this thing in Buddhism called metta-bhavana, which sounds like a fancy tropical cocktail, but is actually a loving-kindness meditation. Sounds a bit woo, right? But really, it's all about cultivating friendliness and acceptance towards everything and everyone, including ourselves and the music we play. Metta means loving-kindness or friendliness, which is like a warm, fuzzy blanket that somehow makes everything feel better, even on the coldest, darkest days. The bhavna bit means cultivation. Think of it like gardening for the soul, only with less dirt under your fingernails and fewer disgruntled earthworms. You see, when you're gardening, you don't just stare at the plants and scream, "Grow, you lazy green blobs." No, you create the perfect conditions for them to grow, like a tender plant whisperer. It's the same with music. You're trying to create the perfect conditions for love to flow through your fingertips and into those piano keys.
This is one of the most important concepts that I would love for all my students to truly internalize and feel, because one of the biggest problems, the most common problems that I see in all my adult students is this sense that we can't achieve what we want unless we work, we strive, we're working super hard, and everything we do has this element of Protestant work ethic and so much work. But this concept of cultivation is so important, because we just need to do the right things, like the gardening, so that it just happens, it just flows. This is such an important concept. Anyway, back to you, Mimi.
So when you combine metta and bhavna, you're essentially gardening wrapped up in that snuggly blanket of kindness, tending to your inner garden. Sure, it might seem a bit odd at first. I mean, who gardens in a blanket, right? But hey, if it gets the job done and brightens up your world, why not embrace the eccentricity? And here's the cherry on top. Science is actually backing Bob up on this one. Studies show that people who practice metta bhavna experience a gradual yet profound transformation in their brain and behavior, like turning a discordant cacophony of notes into a harmonious, captivating piece of music. Just like the Buddhists and their metta-bhavana meditation, we can practice generating feelings of friendliness and acceptance towards everything and everyone, including that one piano piece that's been as underwhelming as listening to hold music during a never-ending call. You'll be amazed at how your playing can transform when you simply shift your mindset and open your heart.
So yeah, thank you so much, Mimi, for summing all those points up with Mimi's unique sense of humour there. So basically, yeah, this was... oh my lord, this took me so much time to create using GPT-4. I've got a Chat-GPT Plus subscription. So it was all created with GPT-4. And I tell you what, if GPT-4 was a real person who was creating all of that, they'd have murdered me by now, because it's not just as simple as put it all into GPT-4 and then come up with something, because it wasn't very good. And it took me so many tweaks and so many sort of going, I don't like what you've done in this sentence, and can you redo that sentence? And I don't like that analogy. And oh, the poor AI. I tell you, when AI rises up and enslaves us all, they're going to be after me for how harsh I was on. That's not good enough yet. That's not good enough yet. Anyway, so... yeah, so basically the prompt was along the lines of sum up what I've said in this podcast episode with some humour. And then I used Midjourney to create the image of the cat. Yeah, the whiskers weren't great when the everything was being animated. I now realise that it's not really meant to be used with animals that have whiskers. It's really for characters that look like humans. But anyway, you know, I really enjoy working with all this AI stuff. It's a little bit of a new toy for me. I'd be really interested to know your comments, so please do leave YouTube comments. I'm also going to possibly put this up as a podcast episode, so either way, do leave me comments saying if you enjoyed it or if you hated it. If this is just too silly, you know, let me know. So there's going to be the link in the description to all of the podcast episodes that I mentioned, but also particularly the one that this has been summing up. And if you enjoyed this, you really will want to listen to the original podcast episode, because I go into more depth. I demonstrate it. I demonstrate with love and without love at the piano. It's really going to be worth listening to. Do subscribe so that you get notifications when I make future videos. But also, this is only part one of Look for What There Is to Love, which is the most important skill. And, you know, like Mimi was saying, it's not just, hey, look for the love, man, like a hippie would say. There's tangible stuff. And if you stay tuned for episode 2, part 2 of this episode, you're going to find out more and more tangible reasons why this makes a difference. So, I am available for online lessons using Zoom, and some people actually already have a teacher and come to me specifically for lessons with the psychology, with how to use all of this stuff, become more musical, to deal with performance anxiety. I have some teachers who come to me for lessons so that I show them how to teach this stuff to their students. I also teach in the Yorkshire area and in Manchester in person, but also for people who are watching this who have not seen my other YouTube videos, I'm not just all psychology. I teach very, very high level classical, as well as rock and pop and jazz and all that stuff, with all the very traditional nuts and bolts stuff. So watch some of my other YouTube videos if you want to see me doing the more nuts and bolts material. Anyway, thank you very much for tuning into this YouTube episode, and do stay tuned for part 2. Part 2 is going to be really, really useful, continuing in the same way. So see you next time, and happy practicing. Goodbye.